You wake up, and the alarm clock across the room is blurry. You blink a few times and it clears, so you tell yourself you're fine. You sit down at breakfast and the newspaper feels harder to read than it did 2 years ago. At dinner you squint across the table at the menu and quietly hand it to someone else. And at night, driving home, oncoming headlights explode into starbursts that leave you gripping the wheel and wondering when exactly that started happening. Most people assume this is simply aging, something to accept, something to manage with stronger glasses or brighter reading lamps. But here is what I need you to hear right now. That assumption may be costing you your vision permanently. The American Academy of Ophthalmology is unambiguous on this point. Once you pass 60, your eyes enter a phase of accelerated biological vulnerability. Conditions like dry eye disease, age-related macular degeneration, early cataract formation, and progressive retinal deterioration become dramatically more common. And the National Eye Institute has documented that vision loss among older Americans is now rising faster than at any previously recorded point in history. What makes this especially alarming is something most eye doctors never take the time to explain during a 15-minute appointment. The most significant damage to your retina is not happening when you are straining to read in dim light. It is not happening when you are staring at a screen. It is happening at night, while you sleep, while you believe your body is resting and repairing itself. Your retina, the light-sensitive tissue lining the back of your eye, has one of the highest metabolic demands of any tissue in the human body. It burns through oxygen and nutrients at a rate comparable to the brain. And when circulation slows, when antioxidant defenses thin, when the tiny capillaries supplying your retinal cells become narrowed with age, the repair work that is supposed to happen overnight simply does not get done. The damage accumulates, silently, continuously, and most people do not notice it until it is already significantly advanced. I am Dr. Pablo. I am a board-certified geriatrician with 18 years of clinical experience, specializing in the health of adults over 60, with particular focus on how cardiovascular and circulatory changes affect every organ in the aging body, including the eyes. And here is the question I hear almost every single week in my practice. Why is my vision getting worse, even though my prescription hasn't changed? Why do I wake up blurry every morning, even after a full night of sleep? And is there anything I can actually do about it that doesn't involve another prescription bottle or a surgical consultation? The answer, according to a growing and genuinely serious body of research, involves something most people have never been told. Certain everyday fruits contain natural compounds that your retinal cells are biologically craving during sleep. Compounds that support the regeneration of damaged photoreceptor cells, that improve microvascular circulation to the retina, that neutralize the oxidative stress accumulating in your lens and macular tissue every single night. And the number one fruit on this list, the one we are building toward, targets a process called glycation, a slow, silent, continuous destruction of eye tissue that the vast majority of people over 60 have never heard of by name. And that may be the single most underappreciated driver of blurry vision, cloudy lenses, and early cataract formation in older adults today. We will get there. But first, let us start at number 7. Number 7 is a fruit most people walk past at the grocery store every single week without giving it a second thought. Kiwi. Small, fuzzy, easy to dismiss as a child's lunchbox item. But for the aging retina, the clinical research on kiwi is worth taking seriously. Here is the specific biological problem it addresses. Your retina contains 2 nutrients that function as its primary internal defense system, lutein and zeaxanthin. These are carotenoids, natural pigments that accumulate specifically within retinal tissue, where they absorb harmful blue wavelength light and neutralize free radicals before they can damage the delicate photoreceptor cells beneath them. Think of them as a built-in biological filter that your eye manufactures from the food you eat. The problem is that your body cannot produce lutein or zeaxanthin on its own. Every molecule of protection your retina has comes entirely from your diet. And research consistently shows that retinal concentrations of both compounds fall measurably as we age, particularly in adults who are not actively replenishing them through food. That decline correlates directly with accelerating risk for macular degeneration and progressive visual deterioration. Golden kiwi is one of the more meaningful dietary sources of both nutrients. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition and Healthy Aging found that older adults who consume 2 golden kiwis daily over an extended period showed measurable improvements in contrast sensitivity alongside significant reductions in morning eye dryness and redness. 2 pieces of fruit producing documented clinical outcomes. That is not a trivial finding. There is a secondary mechanism here worth understanding. Kiwi contains a modest but real amount of serotonin, a precursor that supports deeper, more restorative sleep architecture. This matters more than it might seem. Your eye's glymphatic system, the biological process that clears cellular waste from neural and retinal tissue, operates almost exclusively during deep sleep. Anything that improves sleep depth indirectly improves the eye's ability to complete its overnight repair cycle. I think of a patient named Frank, 67 years old, a retired high school football coach from Western Pennsylvania, who came to me because his morning vision had become so consistently foggy that he had started delaying his morning drive until 10 or 11 o'clock to give his eyes time to clear. His intraocular pressure was normal, his optic nerve looked healthy, but his dietary carotenoid intake was essentially 0. We made one focused change: 2 golden kiwis eaten about an hour before bed each evening. At his follow-up 6 weeks later, Frank told me mornings were different. The fog was lifting within minutes instead of hours. That is not placebo. That is lutein and zeaxanthin reaching tissue that had been starved of them. Eat 2 golden kiwis, specifically the golden variety rather than the green, approximately 1 hour before bed. Golden kiwis carry higher lutein concentrations, produce significantly less gastric acid, and are far better tolerated on an evening stomach. When you eat them, use a spoon to scoop the flesh rather than peeling all the way to the skin. The thin layer of flesh directly inside the outer edge contains concentrated caffeic acid, a potent antioxidant that most people unknowingly discard. Leave that inner layer intact and eat it. Number 6 surprises people because they have always thought of it as nothing more than a summer picnic food: watermelon. But if you are someone who wakes up with vision that takes an hour or more to fully clear, and millions of adults over 60 are, the science behind watermelon speaks directly to why that happens and what can be done about it. As retinal blood flow slows with age, the oxygen and nutrient delivery to photoreceptor cells during overnight hours becomes progressively inadequate. Your eyes essentially wake up in a mild state of circulatory deficit. They have not completed their repair work because the raw materials never arrived in sufficient quantity. The morning blurriness you experience is, in many cases, the direct symptom of that deficit. Watermelon addresses this through 2 distinct pathways. The first is hydration. Watermelon is over 90% water, and tear film stability, which governs how smoothly and clearly light passes through the front surface of your eye, is directly dependent on adequate systemic hydration. The second pathway is lycopene, a carotenoid antioxidant present in watermelon in some of the highest concentrations of any food. Observational research has linked lycopene intake to meaningfully reduced oxidative damage in retinal cells and potential protective effects against both cataracts and age-related macular degeneration. Beyond that, certain compounds in watermelon have been shown to support nitric oxide production in blood vessel walls. Nitric oxide relaxes and dilates capillaries, including the microscopic ones threading through your retinal tissue. Wider capillaries mean better overnight perfusion. Better perfusion means your photoreceptors receive more of what they need while you sleep. A study published in the journal Nutrients found that regular watermelon consumers maintained higher circulating levels of both lutein and zeaxanthin, even when controlling for other dietary sources, suggesting that lycopene may enhance the bioavailability of carotenoids consumed throughout the rest of the diet. That synergy effect compounds the benefit of everything else on this list. I had a patient named Carol, 72. A retired pediatric nurse who had spent her career telling other people how to take care of themselves and had, as she freely admitted, largely ignored her own health in retirement. She came to me because her morning blurriness had become so disruptive that she had stopped going to her early morning water aerobics class, something she loved, because she did not feel safe driving in that window. Her cardiovascular profile showed the kind of mild microvascular narrowing that is common at her age. We talked about nitric oxide support through diet. Watermelon became a non-negotiable part of her evening. 8 weeks later, she was back at her morning class. 1 to 2 cups of chilled watermelon about 30 minutes before bed. Add no salt whatsoever. Even modest sodium elevation raises intraocular pressure, and the Glaucoma Research Foundation identifies chronic pressure elevation, even in ranges most doctors consider borderline, as a meaningful and potentially irreversible risk factor for optic nerve damage. Do not discard the white rind. That pale section contains citrulline, an amino acid the body converts into arginine and then into nitric oxide. Blend a piece of it into a morning smoothie or simply eat a thin strip alongside the flesh. Most of the circulatory benefit is sitting in the part everyone throws away. Number 5 is one that most Americans have genuinely never purchased and may never have seen outside of a specialty grocery store. Black currants. Tiny, intensely dark purple, easy to overlook. But for one specific and serious problem, chronic retinal microinflammation combined with reduced blood flow to the optic nerve. The clinical evidence behind black currants is among the strongest of anything we will discuss today. Here is what that inflammation actually feels like from the inside. It does not feel like pain. It announces itself as halos around streetlights when you drive at night. It shows up as that uncomfortable lag when you walk from a bright kitchen into a dimmer hallway, and your eyes take far longer than they used to in order to adjust. It is the progressive heaviness in your vision in low-light environments that no change in prescription ever seems to fix. These are vascular and inflammatory symptoms, and they require vascular and anti-inflammatory intervention, not a stronger lens. The compounds responsible for black currants effects are anthocyanins, the deep pigments that give these berries their near-black color. In retinal tissue, anthocyanins perform several functions simultaneously. They suppress pro-inflammatory signaling in the microvasculature. They support vasodilation in the blood supply feeding the optic nerve. And critically, they support the regeneration of rhodopsin, the photosensitive pigment in your rod cells that governs vision in dim and dark environments. Rhodopsin is continuously broken down by light exposure and must be continuously rebuilt. That rebuilding process slows significantly with age, and dietary anthocyanins appear to meaningfully accelerate it. A randomized placebo-controlled trial published in the journal Ophthalmology followed patients over 24 months of blackcurrant anthocyanin supplementation at 50 milligrams daily. The treatment group showed significant improvements in optic nerve head blood flow and measurably slower progression of visual field loss compared to placebo. A separate study in patients with normal tension glaucoma found improved retinal perfusion with no change in intraocular pressure, pointing to a genuinely neuroprotective mechanism operating independently of pressure dynamics. Thomas was 69, a former commercial photographer who had built his entire professional life around his eyes, and was now watching his night vision deteriorate in a way that genuinely frightened him. Oncoming headlights shattered into rays. Moving between differently lit spaces left him briefly and uncomfortably blind. He had been told his eyes were aging normally. We added blackcurrant anthocyanin extract to his evening protocol. Over 4 months, his dark adaptation measurably improved. He described it as his eyes remembering how to shift gears again. Fresh black currants are nearly impossible to find in standard American grocery stores. Look for a standardized blackcurrant anthocyanin extract, approximately 50 milligrams, taken in the evening alongside your other fruits. Pair it with a small amount of healthy fat. A few walnuts are ideal, or a source of vitamin C such as a small orange slice. Both fat and ascorbic acid meaningfully enhance anthocyanin absorption, and the difference in how much your retina actually receives is not negligible. Now, before we go further, I want to pause here and ask you something directly. If you are over 60 and you are watching this, I want to know where in the world you are doing it from. Write your age and your location in the comments below. I read them. This community of people who refuse to accept deterioration as inevitable is real, and it matters to me to know who is in it and where they are watching from. Number 4 is something you almost certainly already have sitting in your refrigerator right now: blueberries. But here is what the research reveals, and this surprised me when I first looked carefully at it. The way most people eat blueberries eliminates a significant portion of the eye protective benefit before it ever reaches the tissue that needs it. The problem blueberries address is oxidative damage to photoreceptor cells, the specialized retinal neurons responsible for visual acuity, fine detail resolution, and light adaptation. Decades of ultraviolet exposure combined with declining antioxidant defenses gradually degrade these cells in ways that manifest as blurring, difficulty focusing in low light, and a persistent visual haziness that feels like looking through slightly smudged glass, even when your lenses are clean. The primary active compound is pterostilbene, chemically related to resveratrol, but with substantially superior bioavailability. What makes pterostilbene clinically significant is a property that most dietary antioxidants do not possess. It can cross the blood-retinal barrier, the highly selective membrane separating retinal tissue from general circulation. The vast majority of antioxidants consumed through food never reach the retina in meaningful concentrations. Pterostilbene does, and once there, research indicates it can act directly on oxidative DNA damage occurring within light-sensitive cells. A 2023 study in nutritional neuroscience followed older adults consuming wild blueberries daily for 12 weeks and found statistically significant improvements in measured visual acuity alongside substantially reduced eye strain in low-light digital environments. 12 weeks, one dietary addition. But the study also highlighted a distinction that most people never hear. Wild blueberries, the small, dark variety found in the frozen section of most grocery stores, contain nearly double the pterostilbene and anthocyanin concentration of the large, cultivated varieties sitting in the fresh produce aisle. Frozen wild blueberries are not a compromise. They are the better choice. And here is the mistake that cancels out the benefit. Eating blueberries with or shortly after dairy. The proteins in milk bind directly to anthocyanins in the digestive tract and physically block their absorption. A bowl of blueberries stirred into yogurt is, from a retinal health perspective, largely wasted. Eat your blueberries alone, as a standalone evening snack, and lightly freeze then thaw them before eating. That thermal cycle breaks down cell walls and measurably increases the bioavailability of the active compounds, meaning your retinal tissue actually receives what the research promises. A patient named Beverly, 64, a retired librarian and devoted grandmother, who spent her afternoons reading to her grandchildren, came to me because the text on the page had started to blur after only 20 minutes of reading, forcing her to stop. She was devastated by it. Her retinal imaging showed early photoreceptor stress consistent with oxidative accumulation. Wild blueberries, eaten correctly and consistently, became part of her protocol. 12 weeks later, she reported reading for over an hour without the blurring returning. She cried in my office when she told me that. Number 3 will surprise most people because it is not a fruit that typically appears on any health list, and yet for one very specific and very common problem in adults over 60, the emerging research is genuinely striking. Dragon fruit, bright, visually dramatic, and deeply unfamiliar to most American shoppers. But if you regularly wake up with eyes that feel heavy and fatigued even after a full night of sleep, this one deserves your attention. The condition it addresses is called retinal hypoxia. That is, the state in which retinal tissue does not receive adequate oxygen during overnight hours. Your photoreceptors are metabolically demanding cells. When the capillaries supplying them are narrowed by age, and the oxygen delivery drops below what the tissue requires for repair, you can sleep 8 full hours and still wake up with eyes that feel like they worked all night. Colors appear flatter, peripheral vision feels slightly compressed, and over time, if the hypoxia is chronic and unaddressed, the cumulative cellular damage becomes significant. The variety matters enormously here. You want red-fleshed dragon fruit, not the white interior variety sold in most mainstream stores. Red dragon fruit is rich in betalains, a class of antioxidant pigments found in very few foods that research shows can support nitric oxide production in vascular endothelium, the cells lining your blood vessels. Nitric oxide relaxes and widens capillaries, including those threading through your retinal tissue, improving oxygen delivery during exactly the overnight window when your photoreceptors are attempting to restore themselves. A 2022 study published in Frontiers in Aging Biology reported that participants consuming red dragon fruit extract over 6 weeks showed meaningful improvements in measured ocular circulation, contrast sensitivity, and visual field depth compared to controls. In practical terms, they reported clearer low-light vision and substantially reduced morning eye fatigue. I want to tell you about a patient named Ruth, 75, a former concert pianist who had retired to teaching private lessons from her home. She came to me not because her vision was severely impaired, but because the quality of it had changed in a way she described as everything looking slightly washed out, as though someone had turned down the saturation on the world. Her retinal imaging showed subtle but real signs of reduced macular perfusion. We discussed red dragon fruit as part of a broader circulatory support protocol. Over 2 months, she described the color quality of her vision improving in a way that was meaningful enough to bring her to tears at her follow-up. A pianist notices subtle changes in the world around her. Ruth noticed this one. half of a red-fleshed dragon fruit approximately 1 hour before bed. And here is the detail that almost everyone misses. The black seeds embedded throughout the flesh contain omega-3 fatty acids and magnesium, both of which play documented roles in retinal nerve health and overnight cellular repair. If you swallow the seeds whole, they pass through largely undigested, and you lose nearly all of that benefit. Chew them thoroughly. It takes an extra 30 seconds and it changes what your retinal tissue actually receives. Number 2 has thousands of years of documented use for eye health across multiple medical traditions, and now the clinical evidence is beginning to catch up with that history in ways that are scientifically credible. Goji berries. Small, bright red, slightly sweet, and until recently largely dismissed by Western medicine as a folk remedy. The dismissal was premature. The specific problem goji berries address is macular thinning. Your macula is the central zone of the retina, roughly the size of a pencil eraser, responsible for every detail of the sharp central vision you use to read, recognize faces, distinguish color, and see anything clearly in front of you. Age-related macular degeneration, the progressive degradation of this tissue, is the leading cause of irreversible central vision loss in adults over 60 worldwide. And the foundational process driving it is the gradual depletion of the macula's natural antioxidant defenses under decades of oxidative stress. What makes goji berries exceptional is their zeaxanthin content. Goji berries are among the richest known dietary sources of zeaxanthin on Earth. While lutein provides broad retinal protection across the outer layers, zeaxanthin concentrates specifically and densely within the macula itself. That geographic specificity matters enormously. You are not delivering a general antioxidant to general tissue. You are delivering the exact compound that the macula preferentially accumulates to its highest priority location. A 2021 study published in the journal Nutrients followed adults aged 60 to 80 who consumed a specific quantity of dried goji berries 5 days per week for 90 days. The results showed a statistically significant increase in macular pigment optical density, which is the clinical measure of how well protected the macula is, in the goji group compared to controls. And critically, not a single participant in the goji group showed progression of existing macular changes during the trial period. For anyone who has been told they have early macular changes and that there is nothing to do but watch and wait, that finding deserves serious consideration. Margaret was 70 years old, a retired federal judge, methodical and demanding of evidence, who came to me after her ophthalmologist had found early drusen deposits in her macula, the cellular debris that signals the earliest stage of macular degeneration. She was told to take a commercial eye vitamin supplement. She wanted to know if there was anything else supported by real research. We discussed goji berries in detail. She committed to the protocol with the discipline you would expect from someone who spent decades evaluating evidence. At her next retinal imaging appointment 14 months later, her macular pigment density had increased. Her ophthalmologist asked what she had changed. 2 tablespoons of dried goji berries soaked in warm water for 10 minutes, then eaten approximately 30 minutes before bed. Soaking meaningfully improves digestibility, which matters as gastric efficiency declines with age. And here is a combination that has genuine research support behind it. Eat your soaked goji berries alongside a small square of dark chocolate, at minimum 85% cacao. The flavonoids in high-quality dark chocolate have been shown to enhance the intestinal absorption of zeaxanthin. You are not indulging. You are optimizing a nutrient delivery system that your macula depends on. And now we arrive at number 1, the fruit at the top of this list. And I want you to understand why it sits here, because it is not simply the most nutrient-dense or the most antioxidant-rich. It is here because it targets a process that is almost certainly happening in your eyes right now, that your eye doctor has in all likelihood never discussed with you by name, and that conventional eye treatment does essentially nothing to address. That process is glycation. Glycation is what happens when excess glucose molecules in your bloodstream bind chemically to proteins in your body's tissues, forming compounds called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. In the eye, this process is relentless. It progressively stiffens and clouds the crystalline proteins that make up your lens, which is the mechanism behind cataract formation. It degrades the structural proteins in your retinal tissue. It thickens the basement membranes of the tiny capillaries supplying your macula, reducing their ability to deliver oxygen and nutrients. And it does all of this continuously, silently, in virtually every adult over 60, regardless of whether they have diabetes. Glycation is not a diabetic complication. It is a universal feature of biological aging that happens to be most destructive in the eye. The fruit that addresses this directly is papaya. Not exotic, not expensive, accessible in virtually every American grocery store, and often already sitting on your kitchen counter. But when consumed correctly and at the right time, papaya delivers something no other common fruit does: papain, a naturally occurring enzyme with documented anti-inflammatory properties and a specific capacity to modify the protein structures that glycation targets. Papaya also delivers a dense combination of vitamins A, C, and E alongside folate, nutrients that research consistently associates with tear film stability, retinal protection, and reduced oxidative burden throughout ocular tissue. A 2023 study published in Clinical Gerontology followed older adults consuming papaya in the evening hours and found lower measured levels of glycation markers at follow-up, alongside improved tear production and statistically significant improvements in contrast vision within 6 weeks. For adults experiencing dry eyes, persistent morning blurriness, or early lens cloudiness, those are outcomes worth paying attention to. I want to tell you about a patient named Dorothy, 77, a former watercolor artist who had been told by 2 separate ophthalmologists that the early cataracts in both eyes were progressing normally and that she should expect to discuss surgery within 2 to 3 years. Dorothy was not interested in accepting that timeline without exploring every alternative first. She was precise about her diet in a way that most patients are not. Papaya became a daily evening ritual for her. At her 18-month follow-up, the progression her ophthalmologist had projected had not materialized on imaging to the degree they had anticipated. One of them asked her directly what she had changed. She told him. He wrote it down. 1 cup of ripe papaya cubes approximately 1 hour before bed. 2 details matter here more than people realize. First, fresh papaya is meaningfully superior to processed, canned, or dried versions because papain is an active enzyme that degrades significantly with heat processing. Second, temperature matters. Remove your papaya from the refrigerator at least 45 minutes before eating it. Cold temperatures suppress enzyme activity. You want papain fully active when it reaches your digestive system, not partially denatured by refrigerator cold. Do not pair it with dairy for the same absorption-blocking reason we discussed with blueberries. And squeeze fresh lime juice over the top before eating. The vitamin C in lime meaningfully enhances your body's conversion and absorption of the vitamin A in papaya. Your retina receives more of what it needs, and it tastes considerably better. Now, before I give you the practical evening routine, there are 4 rules that determine whether any of this actually works, because you could eat every fruit on this list and still lose most of the benefit if you get these wrong. Rule 1. Do not combine these fruits with high-calcium foods within 90 minutes. Milk, yogurt, calcium-fortified cereals, and similar foods consumed alongside or shortly before your evening fruits block the intestinal absorption of lutein and zeaxanthin by up to 30%, according to research in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Treat your evening fruit as a standalone snack, separated from your last dairy-containing meal by at least 90 minutes. Rule 2. Always include a small source of healthy fat. Lutein, zeaxanthin, lycopene, and beta-carotene are all fat-soluble. Your intestinal cells cannot absorb them without fat present. A few walnuts, a small amount of flaxseed, or even a few olive oil-dressed vegetables eaten alongside your evening fruit closes this gap entirely. The research difference in absorption between fat-paired and non-fat-paired carotenoid consumption is not marginal. It is substantial. Rule 3. Consistency over quantity. A higher dose eaten occasionally produces far less retinal benefit than a moderate, consistent daily intake. The carotenoids that protect your macula and retina accumulate in tissue over weeks and months. They are not acute interventions. They are slow, steady biological investments. Miss a week and you lose ground that takes weeks to rebuild. Rule 4. And this one I want you to hear clearly because it is the one most people resist. None of this replaces regular professional eye care. Annual dilated eye examinations after 60 are not optional. They are how early macular changes, early glaucomatous damage, and early diabetic retinal changes get caught while they are still addressable. Everything I have shared with you today is designed to support the eye's own biology between those appointments. It is not a reason to skip them. Here is a practical evening schedule you can begin tonight. Between 7 and 8 in the evening, eat 1 cup of ripe, room-temperature papaya with fresh lime juice squeezed over it. Have a small handful of walnuts alongside it.